Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ryan Bijan, host of COWTOWN Movie Classics, and we could not, in good faith, do a tribute to the Hagsploitation genre without having a
Featuring a
discussion.
hag.
Oh, no, 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 no. But without having a discussion on this quintessential psychological thriller from 1962. It is the iconic, ever quotable Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. And joining us tonight is the very knowledgeable, very youthful, very stunning
Yeah, yeah. Too
Tracey
late now, dear heart. Too late.
Tracey Goessel. How are you doing tonight, Tracey?
I'm well, thank you. I am your on-site, on-call psycho biddy because this was this book and then the film triggered the genre, as you said, hagsploitation, the psycho biddy genre, the crazy old lady. And it wasn't just Miss Havisham and Dickens' Great Expectations, but uh, we also can look back on the early 60s and this time for a resurgence of the crazy old lady genre in media.
Oh, definitely. I mean, certainly the idea, the themes of an aging movie star dealing with obsolescence and living in the past. Obviously, that came about in a big way in 1950 with Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard,
Sunset Boulevard, yeah.
which we talked about last week. But yeah, but certainly whatever happened to Baby Jane, when it came to this psycho biddy genre as a horror film, this is certainly a watershed film.
Yes, very much so. And it was not treated as a B movie drive-in, freak thing as so many of the subsequent films were. This was considered an A film. He had two major stars. It was the sort of thing that was reviewed in the New York Times, not favorably, but it was reviewed in the New York Times. And I think it made something like $9 million, which in the early 60s was big bucks.
When we think of the golden age of Hollywood, you have these two iconic divas, and I mean this in the operatic term, these goddesses, larger than life screen presences. You have the Academy Award winning Joan Crawford being pitted against the Academy Award winning Bette Davis, who I'm sure, in the 1930s and 40s, these women were going head to head for a lot of the same roles. I'm sure they were considered for a lot of the same parts. How did they get them on the same page to do?
Well, I'm going to argue that they weren't necessarily considered for the same roles. What happened is Bette Davis in the 30s is rising and gets her first Oscar and becomes a supernova star at Warner's. And she's at Warner's through the 30s, through most of the 40s. And while Bette Davis is in the 30s growing at Warner's, Joan Crawford is probably the second biggest star at MGM. Norma Shearer is the largest star, mostly by virtue of being married to Irving Thalberg.
Right.
Hard not to be the queen of the lot when your husband is the main producer.
It helps.
Um, but Crawford's, you know, a major, major, major star. Then when they feel that she's starting to wane, MGM lets her go, but she signs with Warner's. And now Joan and Bette are in the same sandbox,
Uh-oh.
but they're not necessarily up for the same parts. Warner's is building parts and getting scripts for Bette Davis and building parts and getting scripts for Joan Crawford. But Joan got her Oscar for Mildred Pierce, which was at Warner's in the mid 40s. And at that point, Bette Davis, I think her first Oscar was for in the mid 30s. There's
Yeah.
some parts that are just so amazingly over the top. And you want to talk about amazingly over the top.
Yeah.
Baby Jane. I mean, Crawford is, in a sense, the victim, the heroine, the person you're rooting for in the film. Sorry if I'm giving things away to the
No,
audience.
no.
But Bette Davis she's got the part she can sink her claws into. And it's just juicy and delicious and dreadful and wonderful all at the same time.
I mean, Betty Davis is so incredible in this film, and it definitely is sort of like a heightened callback to these type of melodramatic roles and villainous as she would play in the 1930s, right? Kind
Mhm.
of early on in her career, like in Of Human Bondage. This is almost like a spiritual successor to that type of role. I mean, maybe from your reading or from your research, do you think there was any kind of trepidation at this point in these women's career to do this comparatively lower budget horror film?
Yeah, and with a director that was not very well known, and they were used to the glossy studio products, and here you have a film that's being made in a very modern style with very harsh uh, cinematography and lighting, and it certainly, in neither sense, flatters
Sure.
visually either of these two um, women who were, I hate to say they had were faded beauties, because I argue beauty persists at every age. But
Yes.
you think back to Sunset Boulevard, where William Holden says there's no shame in being 50. You know, you can't be 25 forever. And
Mhm.
I'm going, 50? That was so young. You know, we're supposed to think of Gloria Swanson as this uh, distraught, insane hag at
Yeah.
50. And so, in some ways, it played into these dreadful stereotypes of women once they're past their age of beauty and childbirth age and functionality as mothers are no longer of value and become these psycho biddies. Um, but it was just pure melodrama. And I'm sure it was a bit of a brave thing for each woman to make that choice and to work with the other. And they truly did not like each other. The um, Betty Davis had little to no respect for Joan Crawford as an actress. And as an actress, I'm willing to acknowledge that Joan Crawford has a very beautiful face. You
Oh,
know,
yes. Yeah.
she's a studio product, and is she functions as a star, not as a thespian. Betty Davis had stronger acting chops, and certainly was willing to deglamorize herself and disappear into a role. Um, but she also had this brittle, uh, egotistical sensibility where she had no interest in sharing credit. And there was an anecdote years later where Joan Crawford had urged Betty Davis to, take a look at the film. It had been years since she'd seen it. Just watch it again, see what you think. And Betty Davis looked at the film and said, "Yeah, no, you were right. I was wonderful." Like, okay.
Well, she certainly is. Do you have any thoughts about the film itself before we get started?
Um, I can tell you, think of it as a product of its time, meaning things we are so inured to shock and horror and blood, etc., that coming back and seeing something like this now, it almost seems quaint. But I can't tell you the horror that people had in that one shot where there's a rat
Hmm.
on the dish, and that that sort of thing was beyond the pale.
Yeah.
You just, movies until the mid 50s had been released under the production code, and you just did not show things like that and see things like that. So for its time, it's very advanced in the horror genre. It doesn't rely on simple jump scares. It relies on building up in tension and fear and what's going to happen. The only other thing I notice about it is Betty Davis's daughter plays sort of the young woman next door.
Hmm.
She's terrible. I mean, that poor thing did not know how to act, and it was the absolute nepotism. So when you see this girl playing a not very good performance, I had to look it up. It's like, who the heck hired this woman? And it turned out to be Bette Davis's daughter, not the one who wrote
Yeah.
a nasty book. That was one of Joan Crawford's daughters, but it was
Yeah.
bad.
Well, I guess we know that talent is not always genetic, I guess. All right. Well, without further ado, if you're in the audience, please stick around after the film so you can hear the rest of our conversation with Miss Tracey Goessel from 1962, directed by Robert Aldrich. Whatever happened to Baby Jane? Wow, that movie is still pretty potent.
Makes you nervous to go to the beach.
Oh yeah, no, you
Know
never know.
who you are going to encounter.
Yeah, especially in Los Angeles, right? Even today, you have to be careful when you're on the beach.
Yeah. Uh, there's some nutcases down there.
Betty Davis, because of this film, probably more so than any of her contemporaries, she would certainly become the queen of the psycho biddy or hagsploitation genre. She did so many follow-up films. I mean, you had Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte, you had The Nanny, The Anniversary for Hammer Films in England. So these types of roles definitely occupied probably most of her filmography in the 60s and 70s.
Until you get to the television stuff and
Hmm.
the long form miniseries and stuff like that. Joan Crawford also continued on doing, axe murderer movies and uh, Scrog. Her last film was so dreadful. But her career kind of continued its decline,
Hmm.
and she just wanted to be working, so she would take what she was offered. But what I love is in the subsequent film, Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, where they brought in Olivia de Havilland for the Joan Crawford role. Originally, it was going to be Joan Crawford. It was going to be sort of a follow-up, not a sequel, but a rematching of the two stars,
Sure.
Astaire and Rogers together again. They would very pointedly go out of their way to have photographs of themselves on the set drinking from bottles of Coca-Cola, because Joan Crawford was the widow of one of the senior Pepsi Cola executives. And so, she was all pro Pepsi and associated with that brand. So Bette Davis was absolutely kind of giving it to her with the very purposefully being seen with Coca-Cola.
Hmm. Now, you talked about how it's hard for any person, any woman to be allowed to age gracefully, but especially if you're in the public eye
Yes.
as a movie star, because of this because of this trend in casting these these stars from these powerhouses from the golden age of Hollywood in these types of lower budget exploitation, suspense, horror films, not only in this film, but it kind of paved the way for like you mentioned Olivia de Havilland in Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, and she did Lady in a Cage. She did a few of
Yeah,
her
the elevator one where she's trapped in the elevator.
like Miriam Hopkins. I'm trying to think off the top of my head of Shelley Winters, right? These women
Yeah.
had career because of this genre revival. Now, in that time, there weren't a lot of probably media roles for middle-aged women, aging women in traditional dramas and comedies. Was this genre a blessing or a curse?
It depends upon your aesthetics. If
Sure.
you're a working actor and you want um, a paycheck, then it's a blessing. If you are looking to build a cumulative reputation, then you see kind of this peak and then this decline. It can be considered a curse. But I think most of these people just wanted to work, wanted to keep acting, wanted to practice their craft, didn't want to be forgotten. And for the most part, those women at that level had enough money to live comfortably a retired life. But hey, they were stars, damn it. And they wanted to be treated like stars and remembered as stars.
Speaking of that, especially Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, it deals with an actress who was a child star in the early teens and
Yeah, in
you know,
vaudeville.
in vaudeville, right? Kind of almost predating the silent film era, which is your area of expertise, I may say. So, what was it like for a lot of these women in the 1910s and 20s making the transition for sound, trying to maintain a consistent career in their own rights?
Very few did it successfully. You will see women like Blanche Sweet having small parts in early talking films. But remember, this was an era when if you were over 35, you played the grandmother.
Yeah.
The heroine would be 16, and it was just, in one sense, this is 120 years ago, people did not live as long. There was a reason why Congress and FDR said retirement age will start at 65, because not that many people live to 65.
Yeah.
They just, the reason dementia rates are going up is not because we're getting more demented, it's because we're preventing heart disease, curing people of their cancers, all the things that would bump them off earlier so that they live and get old enough so that they can get demented, which of course makes me think of Baby Jane, but that's something different. She was just mentally ill. But if you think about these women who are almost trapped in an image, and when that image no longer applies, it would look absurd. Think of Mary Pickford, who played children into the mid 1920s. And so she's in her 30s, still convincingly playing children, but she's not on stage. She's not Maud Adams doing Peter Pan. She's in front of a camera. And so in the late 20s, she very purposefully cut those famous curls and said, I have to grow up. And that's in one sense good, because if it was 1945 and she's still sporting the curls, she would have been Baby Jane. And she was astute enough not to want that for herself. But in an industry that praises and embraces and rewards youth, both men and women. I mean, Doug Fairbanks had the same issue. He could not age out gracefully from his swashbuckling image, and didn't have an interest in playing character roles. He had been the star. And so I think we're better now that we can still embrace our Clint Eastwoods and our Harrison Fords, our Jessica Langs, our, name Meryl Streep. My God, Meryl Streep's acting arc is longer than the acting arc that Bette Davis had between her first film and Baby Jane, when she was already, way past her peak and washed out. These women had shelf lives of 10 or 15 years, and then they were moved on. And so there's a poignancy to all of this. And then, of course, the character of Blanche, who had been a movie star, the role twists, who's the dominant sister. She also was almost taunted with, wow, she started in silent films. Well, silent films were still the prevalent media 30 years before I was born. You think of 30 years now, looking back, that's not very long ago. That's the early 90s.
And that's what's interesting.
Snoring noise was my dog. I apologize.
Oh, no, that's all right. Well, I was going to say that it's so fascinating now. There's a debate, especially if you're a fan of Turner Classic Movies. Oh, they're showing a movie from the 80s. That's not a classic film. It's like, well, that movie from the 80s is older now than Casablanca was when that movie came out, right?
Yeah, when yes, you're exactly right. Although I'm one of those people who go, no, those are modern films.
Yeah.
I appreciate that they have to put them up there, and I recognize the challenge of their business model. But my God, when being older doesn't necessarily make you classic. To me, the classics really run from 1903 to maybe 1953. And
I firmly believe they should have stopped making movies in 1929. I think it went down.
Yes, you're right. Talkies are just a fact. And yes, talking films are wonderful, and they managed to relearn all the techniques that they had in the silent era. But a silent film is an entirely different experience, even in your brain, the way your brain fires. When you're watching an image with music versus when you're processing words, it's a different part of your brain. So the experience of watching a silent film is quite different from the experience of watching Baby Jane, which gives me a reason to plug. Hold on, brief plug.
Uh-oh.
www.filmpreservationsociety.org. Come check us out. We are working on restoring many lost and threatened and challenged silent films and scanning them and bringing them back and restoring them in time, because nitrate won't wait. Film literally turns to dust. And if you don't have somebody preserving the Casablanca is going to go away. Well, Casablanca hopefully will never go away, but eventually many of these early wonderful films will. And even films in the 60s and 70s are being lost and tossed aside.
Yeah, so if you're in the audience, if you've been to any of our silent film screenings or looked into Film Preservation Society, what Tracy and her company does, it's very important work. And if you go on their website, if you buy her books, if you buy the Blu-rays, the DVDs, it helps finance the
Film
continued
preservation.
restoration, the preservation of these amazing
Yeah.
films. Well, before we close out, you mentioned one of the amazing supporting actors is Victor Buono in
Oh,
this
yeah.
film.
He was so young. Oh my
Yeah.
God, he was young. This was his first film appearance. And then he got a career from this. So I
Yeah.
thought he was marvelous.
Right. Well, if you know me, I'm a big Batman fan. So when I think of Victor Buono, I think of him as actually, this is by coincidence. I didn't have this ready, but I always think of him as he's King Tut in the.
Oh my God, that's marvelous. Look at you.
So I have a Victor Buono action figure.
You have the best collection of toys. I mean,
I try.
you're the
Maybe.
perfect man to be running this program. And I hope that people come and support you and fill your theater. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have we, the film nuts, speak to each other.
Absolutely. And that,
Us
honestly,
speak to each other.
and that means a lot to me of you saying that. And it's always a pleasure for us. And I really hope that, each time we do one of the events, I highly recommend you check out Tracy's book, Douglas Fairbanks, uh,
Oh, the first king of Hollywood,
First King of Hollywood, The
the
Life
life
of
of Douglas Fairbanks. Yes, it was published in 2015, but it's still out there. I mean, they're still selling both hardcovers and paperbacks on Amazon, and of course, you can get a signed copy on our website with all of the profit going to film preservation, and eBay often has used copies for sale because little old people die and then they leave their books behind.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I don't know if you're at liberty to say this. Has anyone purchased the movie rights yet? Are we going to get the Douglas Fairbanks biopic miniseries?
how I wish. No, Doug is still not fired up anybody's interest. And a film was made about Mary Pickford back in 2016 that couldn't even get a distributor. Now, was it a very good film? I don't know. I never got to see it. I got to see them filming portions of it. It certainly had a reasonably distinguished cast, including Carrie Elways as D.W. Griffith.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they asked me to coach the young actor who was playing Douglas Fairbanks, so I got to go onto the lot and see them working. But no, we the failure of the film Babylon, wasn't that the Brad Pitt?
Yes.
Yeah, that commercial and critical failure is sort of doomed for at least half a generation any interest in somebody doing this sort of thing. But there is discussion of a biopic of Buster Keaton.
I have heard about that.
Jim
Yeah.
Curtis's marvelous Buster Keaton book has got a producer attached, and Rami Malek, Oscar-winning attached to play Buster Keaton, and now they need to, the actors strike and the writers strike gum them up. But they're working on negotiating and cutting a deal for a 10-part miniseries on Buster. So I'll take that. That to
Yeah.
me is wonderful.
Yeah, maybe we'll get a Douglas Fairbanks cameo that'll do like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right?
Universe, yeah, let's see, Doug.
We'll spin
Well,
it.
certainly Keaton started to release through United Artists in the mid to late 20s, working under Joseph Skank.
Mhm.
So there's a little bit of overlap there.
Well, definitely. Well, Tracy, it's always a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so
You,
much for your time.
my pleasure, and everybody have a great night. Drive safely.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And if you're in the audience, please join us next Monday. We will be turning the clock back to 1932 and seeing a young Joan Crawford at the peak of her charisma. Well, I don't know if she ever had a peak. She was always wonderful in the movie Rain, where it's a very
Oh, Sadie Thompson. Oh,
Sadie Thompson.
wonderful, wonderful film. Maybe then later in the year you can show the Gloria Swanson version.
Oh, well, yeah, I thought,
Oh,
someone else brought it up to me. Maybe we should have followed up Sunset Boulevard with that, but you never know. There's always
oh,
room.
the time goes ahead of us and is infinite, so you can book all kinds of wonderful things. And I think if I were down where you're living, I would be down in the audience to see Rain. That's marvelous.
It truly is. Well, once again, my name is Ryan Bijan. We'll see you next time.
Bye bye.
Bye.